So basically, this session will be mainly a presentation of our findings from the fields, and it will mainly focus on Palestinian refugees and Syrian refugees in Turkey. And I'd like to start by saying that when we talk about the refugee crisis, the first image that comes to mind is that of people crossing the Mediterranean, risking their lives and the lives of their families, attempting to access Fortress Europe. Perhaps not so much within academic contexts or within a context of third sector work, but also comes to mind images of men, black men, Arab men, men coming from previously colonized regions and areas across the world, men that are perceived as a threat to national and regional security within Europe. Rarely we perceive women as a threat per se, and we rarely think about these refugees resorting to neighboring countries and not to Europe. Here and now, we would like to do two things. Firstly, shift the attention to those refugees outside of Europe and the West, and we would like to argue for a gendered approach when addressing refugee issues. We will be drawing on research data to review Syrian women refugee situations in Turkey and Palestinian refugee women. Throughout history, colonial powers have managed to assign themselves the position of saviors and do-gooders. In fact, colonial powers have justified their conquests by claiming that their aim was to develop and educate the undeveloped, uneducated, and uncivilized. This narrative has undermined the existence of refugee groups and communities receiving assistance and seeking refuge in non-European and non-Western countries. In fact, we're only talking about a refugee crisis now because Europe is in question, notwithstanding the evidence that refugee flows have been taking place throughout the history in different places and regions in the world. There is no refugee crisis in Europe, but there are movements within Europe resisting refugee flows. It's beyond the scope of this presentation, but important to highlight and question the role of imperialism and modern forms of colonization in the region, which contribute to instability and lack of security and thus led to refugee flows in the first place. It's problematic that we think of refugees coming into Europe from the Middle East, and we forget the extent to which the Middle East has historically provided a haven to several flows of refugees, such as the Circassian, European Jewish immigrants, Chechens, Armenians, and Bosnians, among others. In addition to that, similar to Europe, the Middle East has also witnessed internal waves of immigration and refuge for social, political, economic, and security reasons. Due to the occupation, the Palestinians have been displaced within Palestine and have sought refuge in Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon. The Iraqis, following the so-called War of Liberation, sought refuge in Jordan and Syria and other countries. The Syrians are currently seeking refuge in Turkey, Jordan, and Lebanon, and even in Gaza. To include Middle East internal refugee flows, my colleague Nof will start by reminding us of the Palestinian refugee situation from a gendered perspective, and I will move on later to talk about the experiences of Syrian refugee women in Turkey.
Over the past 2 years, the issue of Palestinian refugees has come center stage following the Syrian crisis, which resulted in the siege of Al Yarmouk refugee camp in Syria, which began in December 2012. The issue of Palestinian refugees in Syria is highlighted by the intensification of events in Syria since March 2011, which poses an increased threat to the lives of Palestinian refugees living in camps within these borders. As one interviewee stated, "We, the Palestinians, have become homeless 3 times. My grandparents have fled the Zionist occupation in 1948. Then we had to leave Syria to Lebanon because of the civil war. And in Lebanon, we are imprisoned in camps and we are not treated as human beings, so we fled to Turkey." An interviewee in Turkey. However, the situation of Palestinian refugees and internally displaced Palestinians elsewhere is still very relevant, like in Lebanon, Jordan, Egypt, occupied West Bank, and occupied Gaza. They are still economically, socially, and politically a marginalized group. Palestinian refugees are the largest single refugee group that has been left in limbo for almost 67 years. The need to address this issue is particularly important because Palestinian refugees, as well as internally displaced Palestinians, have been historically and politically marginalized. I argue for a need to gender the debate around Palestinian refugees because the distinct experience of women Palestinian refugees has been overlooked within this context. Understanding the position of women refugees and the unique struggles they continue to face is essential to understanding their particular experiences as refugees and in highlighting their differential needs. Just to remind you of the numbers of Palestinian refugees and internally displaced, Jordan has the majority of UNRWA registered persons, and the number is estimated at around 2 million. 1.2 million in occupied Gaza, 762,000 in occupied West Bank, 480,000 in Syria, and 450,000 in Lebanon. It's worth mentioning that most Palestinian refugees are internally displaced persons live outside the camps. In order to fully understand the refugee situation, one needs to take their experiences thoroughly into account because personal experiences have a great extent political implications. Additionally, a feminist approach takes gender into consideration through looking at how women's experiences are different from men's. We can also see how gender can be used to draw group boundaries within certain communities, and in the case, the refugee community will enable a more complex picture of the Palestinian refugees to emerge. Furthermore, refugee camp women suffer from more cultural restrictions in comparison to other women because of the camp-specific situations. Taking women's experiences into consideration is not only important because of the cultural restrictions and patriarchy, but also important for understanding the broader context in terms of displacement, political violence, and economic exploitation, and how that affects women refugees differently. Countries hosting Palestinian refugees in the region are considered patriarchal. Palestinian refugee women suffer from stricter patriarchal controls in camps. For example, Jordan is considered a patriarchal country where it's expected that both men and women will adhere to specific gender roles. I observed during my visits to the camps in the capital of Jordan that the areas are very conservative and the practice of patriarchy is clearly much more dominant than in other parts in Amman. It has become apparent that the people in the Palestinian refugee camps have maintained close personal bonds, which can be attributed to the fact that the camp was established in the 1950s. Just after the establishment of the Zionist state on Palestinian lands, due to the lack of governmental support and protection, high poverty levels and isolation of the camps from other parts of Jordan create subcultures within Palestinian camps. In other words, there are economic, social, and political differences between people living within and outside the camps. This created particular social and cultural groupings, and in such circumstances, gender can be one of the markers for defining group borders. Sexually, culturally, and physically, women are boundary markers for ethnic groups. And speaking of gender relations in other ethnic groups or communities is frequently used as a marker of difference. Gender relations often serve to set group boundaries. As women interviewee stated, we have very different lifestyles, very different. They have a very different moral standings. We are more authentic in our lifestyles. Women do not dress modestly outside. The situation of refugee camps in Jordan has significant influence on women's experiences. Such conditions make the application of gender bias and patriarchy much more negative on women and girls' lives. Interestingly, place of residence influences women's experiences, as refugee camps are not considered safe areas and consequently would influence women's mobility and freedom of movement. It has become apparent that safety is very much linked to poverty in refugee camps. Female interviewees mentioned that there are high crime levels because of poverty, which can lead to women feeling unsafe and can contribute to real physical danger. Unsafe conditions in the camps can lead men to controlling women's sexuality by preventing them to move freely. Distance from schools was a recurring theme during our interviews with refugee women, which explained why some women had less access to education. Women from refugee camps had to leave school at an early age because of the lack of secondary schools in the area where they live. And distance from school was an issue that women's families regarded as an issue of safety and protection. This shows that women's access to education is limited by social control exercised by male heads of household and sometimes even women. Women explained how their families had in some cases forced them into marriage and in other cases arranged for them to be married because they could not afford to send them to distant schools. Our research data shows that poverty and camp situations reinforced patriarchal structures as women got married at an early age. I would like to conclude with a statement by Cynthia Inlow. Inlow states that women always carry the burden of the community instead of the men. Men ascribe symbolic roles to women, which can be manifested in different ways and affect women's experiences and lives. Women are seen as 1, the community's or the nation's most valuable possession, 2, the principal vehicle for transmitting the whole nation's values from one generation to the next, bearers of the community's future generations, crudely nationalist wombs. 4, the members of the community most vulnerable to defilement and exploitation by oppressive alien rulers.
Thank you, Nof. The situation of Syrian refugee women in Turkey is particularly bad, and given that they carry the burden of their communities, children are being affected as well. Our research findings from Turkey showed that there is a need to pay special attention to women refugees and also LGBTQ refugees. Turkey has been labeled for a long time as the most welcoming country to Syrian refugees, taking in the largest number of refugees in the region. Due to this misconception, in addition to other political factors, little research has been carried out about the situation of Syrian refugees in Turkey, and even less research has been conducted to address the differential experiences of Syrian refugee women. However, I would like to draw your attention to the fact that we do believe that women's experiences are different, but it's misleading to say that they are worse off than men, because they are just different experiences based on their different gender identities. Since the eruption of the crisis in Syria, Turkey has had an open door policy to Syrian refugees, making the country the largest host of Syrian refugees in the whole world. Currently, and according to UNHCR data, there are about 2 million Syrian refugees in Turkey, and according to the ILO, 1.5 million of those refugees reside outside the camps, which means that the majority of Syrians in Turkey are non-camp refugees who do not receive humanitarian support. Non-camp refugees oftentimes find themselves living in ruins and makeshift arrangements, and those who can afford rent are often exploited by landlords, and many live in overcrowded, overpriced houses. Women and children constitute 75% of the whole refugee population in Turkey, and female-headed Syrian refugee households constitute 22% of the non-camp Syrian refugee population. There are restrictions on Syrian refugees' employment rights in Turkey, especially that they are perceived as guests in Turkey. Whereas Turkey is a signatory to the 1951 Geneva Convention, it has a reservation on geographic limitations, which means that Turkey can take in only European refugees and not non-European refugees and settle them in the country. So they are in a transit state in Turkey. Women often find themselves engaging in income-generating activities such as petty trading, seasonal agricultural work, and cleaning. The challenges women reported in relation to work and employment in Turkey were based on fear of harassment, lack of child daycare, bad working conditions, and discrimination by Turkish employers. A female interviewee from Rihanli in the south of Turkey said, "I'm cleaning offices these days. I refuse to clean houses because of one of my friends here, a Syrian from Aleppo, went to clean a house once and the man in the house sexually harassed her." She added that her friend couldn't report the harassment to anyone in fear of Turkish authorities' reaction, as she said, they would probably take the Turkish man's side. One woman interviewee in Rihanli also said, "I don't want to work. I don't work because I enjoy it, but I have to work. All of the women I know feel the same. Some work because they lost their husbands, others because of their husbands' disabilities, and others because their parents cannot provide for the households." Some women have also explained that due to desperation and bad living conditions, women are resorting to sex work for survival. Isolation has become a huge problem for Syrian refugee women and girls, and it has also become part of their lives, causing some of them fear of being in public spaces, living in an unfamiliar environment where they do not speak the language, in addition to control from male and female relatives under the excuse of protection, have been major impediments in the face of Syrian refugee women's integration. Restrictions over women's movements are also linked to controlling their sexuality to preserve the family's honor, as family's honor is linked to women's sexual conduct and behavior. Interestingly, the majority of women interviewees did not problematize the discourse of honor and describe the lives they would like to have when they describe the lives they would like to have. They just used the discourse of honor in a different way, but it was still a major theme in what they said. For example, one interviewee said, Honor is very important and women should protect their honor. But we shouldn't judge every woman that leaves her house. She might be running an errand. It doesn't mean that she's doing wrong. The wrongdoing here is mainly to refer to sexual conduct. Pressure on women is also practiced from the hosting community. It has been reported that Syrian refugee women face harassment and exploitation as they are perceived as guests and strangers in the country of exile. Women are exposed to sexual and verbal harassment and exploitation because of their gender and their inferior position, especially women who live on their own. The absence of a male guardian from the household makes women seem as easy targets for harassment and exploitation, as they're perceived as lacking in a protector. One female interviewee who lives on her own in Hatay said, "I don't have a man to back me. I feel exposed. I need to be extra tough with people so they know that they cannot trespass my boundaries. The owner of a house I used to live in asked me for sex in an imposing, forceful way. I fought back and I left the house." Gender-based forms of violence committed against Syrian women include child marriage, forced marriages, and the particular situation of women leads to imposed forms of radicalization as well. Child marriage can be unequivocally deemed as a form of sexual and gender-based violence. However, from the perspective of those supporting the phenomena, it's a necessity and a means to protect the family's honor and save child brides from poverty and homelessness in some cases. The phenomena is not new to either Turkey or Syria. Child marriages have been reported prior to the crisis, and particularly in rural areas in both countries. Despite the fact that there are legal restrictions on child marriage, it's mostly done unofficially and remains unregistered by religious figures within the community. Moreover, it has become clear that after the eruption of the crisis, child marriage has become more organized through fixers who find young brides to older men looking for wives, or in some cases, just for sex. During an interview with a Syrian woman in Rihani, she said, "My neighbor married his daughter off to a Turkish man. She was 14 and he was 40. The man took her for 2 months and then returned her to her family. What does she have now? Nothing at all. She lost her virginity and is going to be called a divorced woman now. She has no rights at all because the marriage was not even registered with the authorities." The same woman explained that there are Turkish fixers who in most cases speak little Arabic and who arrange such marriages. She hesitated while speaking and decided not to give details about the fixers. In addition to child marriage, fixers also arrange adult marriages, mostly for men interested in taking on second and sometimes third wives. There have been cases of these marriages not lasting for more than a month. However, the main issue in these incidents is women's legal rights as second or third wives in Turkey. Polygamy is not recognized by the state of Turkey, and men are not allowed by law to take on more than one wife. Therefore, marriages between Syrian women and already married Turkish men are not officially registered, and the woman's rights as a wife are neither guaranteed nor recognized. In cases when these marriages last and the couple have children, the children are not registered under their biological mother's name, but under the name of the first wife. In some cases, marriage has been used to cover for sex work through the use of short-term marriage contracts. A female research participant from Kilis, a city in the town in the south of Turkey, said, "I know some families now let their daughters enter into temporary marriage contracts. A fixer would be involved. A man would come and take the girl under the guise of marriage, pay her family money as if it was her dowry, have sex with her, and return her to her parents." At least 6 women interviewees reported that when families fail to pay rent, homeowners request to have sex with one of the women in the household in return of letting them off 1 month rent. Due to poverty and harsh living conditions, Syrian refugee women are prone to sexual and ideological exploitation by several actors, including those who are supposed to provide them with aid and support. Women interviewees have told several first and second-hand stories about how aid workers affiliated to some local organization and charity givers from the Arab Gulf countries, including Saudi Arabia and Kuwait, distribute aid in a way that mobilizes around a radical Islamic ideology, and that also involves marriage to radical Islamists. Women have explained that some distributors of aid would not give them any aid if they were not fully covered. One interviewee in Rihali said, "I wear the hijab, but I don't cover my face. I was told by a Saudi aid distributor, I was told that there was a Saudi aid distributor, and I got in contact. When we met, he gave me some money, little money actually, and he said that he would only give me more if I cover more." 5 interviewees from Rihali highlighted that some Syrian women have married ISIL fighters, and this has caused them many problems. One of them said, "The women didn't know the name of the husband. They knew a nickname like Abu Muawiyah or Abu Sufyan. These men pass by Turkish cities, get married on the way to Syria, leave their wives in many cases pregnant behind without any official papers showing their identity, and the children cannot then be registered to have a father. Some of these men disappear and never come back, leaving the women in very vulnerable positions within their communities and within Turkey."
We've done also interviews with LGBTQ identified people, but because we don't have enough time, we couldn't present the data. But of course, they have different experiences because of their gender identity and because of their refugeehood status. Thank you.
Yeah.